Welcome to the On the Gold podcast. Today, talking with Chris Ralph on Dig It All or Use Your Discrimination Sparingly. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of On the Gold. And again, in the ongoing series with professional prospector Chris Ralph, we are going to talk about a very, very important subject, especially now that we have new types of discriminating detectors into the gold industry that are working, but do they work all the time? Hey, Chris, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
So, I don't even want to mess around with this one. You know, there's not a lot of preamble here. Dig it or use your discriminator sparingly.
Yeah, and you know that we talked about this a little bit on the Lost podcast.
The Lost podcast. I am so glad that within our first season we have the Lost podcast.
We talked about this a little bit, and you and I don't necessarily see exactly eye to eye, but we're pretty close on it.
I think we are.
You know, I totally agree that if you're in an area with minimal or even kind of moderate amounts of trash, you really should dig it all. But there are places where there's decent gold where the trash gets pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think that's important with this is a lot of guys just don't know how to get the proper performance out of the discrimination systems on their metal detector. They don't understand it, and so they use it incorrectly or maybe get bad results that they, could have avoided. And so I guess if you really are a brand new prospector and you're just getting started, maybe you should dig it all, even if you're in a trashy area. Although people get discouraged with those trashy areas and walk away from them.
I absolutely agree. And some of those have been my boon areas where I found a lot of trash. I was willing to dig through almost all of the trash. Well, in the old days of not having a decent discriminator, yes, I would dig through all of the trash. I absolutely would. So there is the discouragement, but the word that scares me the most is the new word for discrimination, dependency. And I mean, we'll get into, and this will naturally lead into that, but discouragement and dependency are the two things I think anybody that's out there with a discriminating detector has got to be absolutely aware of.
One of the things that you have to understand in order to use these systems properly, because all the gold-oriented detectors give you basically is a ferrous, non-ferrous. It's not like a detector made for hunting schools and parks and that sort of thing, where it tries to tell you whether you got a quarter or a dime or whatever. And with your gold-oriented detectors, you really just get ferrous versus non-ferrous.
Right.
But what the prospector has to understand is there's really three options, not just ferrous or non-ferrous, but you have to accept and understand a response from the detector that says, I don't know.
Oh, yes.
And if you don't get the I don't know part of it, then then you are going to walk away from gold nuggets and other stuff that you really should be digging. Mm-hmm. So you have to, if your detector is bouncing around or giving you odd sounding signals, it doesn't seem to be locking on one way or the other, you got to accept that as an I don't know. Mm-hmm. And part of the deal with it is gold, a lot of times the gold that you dig is small, and the detector needs a pretty good sample of what it's detecting in order to be able to differentiate between ferrous and non-ferrous. Mm-hmm. And so if you're digging a target and it's bouncing around, you're getting, if it's one of the silent versus sound types, you're getting chirps, but nothing solid. Or if it's one of the types that has an indicator bar or something, like I say, it's going one way, it's going the other, it's going a little bit one way or a little bit the other, it's not really sure. You got to accept you're not getting strong enough signal, and so you need to dig more until you can get a strong signal.
Yes.
The other
Yes.
thing is that you have to be over the top of it. I've seen a lot of people swing near a target, like they're not really pinpointing it accurately. And so if you take a detector, even if you're close enough to get a decent reading and you swing near the target, but not over it, or you swing right up to the target and then turn around. You don't swing actually over it, but you just swing up and then back off before you actually go over it. You can get all kinds of weird readings. The other thing that you can get is when you have more than one target in the ground, can give you very strange, unexpected readings. So I guess you have to have the experience to understand when you're seeing more than one target,
Mm-hmm.
and then understand when your machine is bouncing around. It's not telling you ferrous or non-ferrous. It's telling you I'm not sure.
Right. Right. And that is, and that and more than one target. Those are two really good things to run down. I can give you a case in point. Yesterday, I was out with Kevin Bell and his friend, and Rick heard a target. And this is where using your discriminator scares me, especially with a new user. It really does, because he was a new user, and I heard the target. We had some headphone failures. Guys didn't have the right cables, whatever. I don't even remember what it all was. But now I've got two guys out there working without headphones, which for me wasn't bad, because now I get to hear everything that they're hitting. But I was talking to Kevin, listening to him go over a target, when I heard Rick hit a slight target. And the first thing he did was go into the discriminator on this particular machine that he was using. He went right to the discriminator, and it gave him a bouncing signal. It wasn't ferrous, it wasn't non-ferrous, but because it didn't drive a good audio signal, he started to walk away from it. And I called him out on it, and he started digging, and he did dig a little tiny piece of iron trash. It probably looked like just what was left of a boot tack or a furniture tack.
Okay.
And then going back into it without discrimination, because I just forbid him to use the discrimination at that point. He dug down about another 2.5, 3 inches and pulled out his first gold nugget. But had he just gone with that discrimination, used that discrimination, he would have missed that target over completely. Because it wasn't a big nugget, it was a little nugget. And the iron signal was a much more positive signal. And by eliminating it, he thought he eliminated everything that was there. So, there's that part of it. So that's where I get a little scared with, especially with new users. And that's where dependency bothers me. I don't even know where the hell I started out with this, but I just wanted to share that part of it. But and then the other thing is that, you know what, keep on going. I've got other things I want to talk about as this, but we're on the same side of the fence on this, but we're just kind of standing on the opposite side of the fence post.
Yeah, it's more like we're different flavors of the same ice cream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, vanilla and vanilla bean. So there we go.
Anyway, the times that I use the discrimination, actually on the detector we're talking about, you don't have a problem with me mentioning detectors, right?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I was
show out the other day using my Gold Monster 1000.
Right.
And I found a little tiny patch 6 or 8 weeks ago when I was with some guys, but we found it way at the end of the day, and I took out, I don't know, a half a dozen little flakes. This was in a hydraulic pit in California in like an hour, okay? It honestly was taking me 4 or 5, because the flakes were so small, it was taking me 4 or 5 minutes to get them out of the hole and into my bottle. So I thought, I need to come back to this spot, because we had to leave. And so I came back just the other day and went around and got another half dozen little pieces before I thought that I'd fairly well cleaned up that immediate spot. And almost all the targets bounced around, and it's like, yeah, it's a weak target. It's bouncing around. I'm digging it. And I think I dug one piece of iron, and it bounced more to the iron side than to the non-iron side, but I dug it anyway. I did walk away from one target, though. It was just a screamingly loud target, and the detector said iron, 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 iron. And, this is a hydraulic pit, of which most of the gold is really tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And so I walked away from a target just because, there's big pieces of trash sometimes in those pits, rusty old, this was a target that was bigger than a nail.
Right.
This was a can-sized target.
Right.
And it just, the detector was 100% sure. And I poked around it from different angles, and it was still 100% sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I walked away.
And this is where,
That's a choice.
Yeah, it is a choice, but given today's technology on Ferrous discrimination, I can't disagree with you that that's not a good choice, because 5 years ago, before this technology existed, if you had just that iron signal from any manufacturer detector, you really, to me, I couldn't trust that. I really couldn't trust that. Now, and I've hit with my same machine with my Gold Monster, I've hit ferrous targets that were just absolutely ferrous targets, and I've hit these so many times, and there is no question. But if I hit that ferrous target and that bar bounces at all, or that sound bounces at all, I'm going to dig that target. I'm absolutely going to dig that target. And every time I have, it has been a successful target. But sometimes it's been iron, sometimes it's just been, just something else in that same vicinity, along with a tiny piece of gold. 5 years ago, I couldn't do that. Today, I can. I can go out there. And as you just said, it's ferrous, ferrous, ferrous. No matter how you turn to it, how
Right.
you looked at it, it still remained as a ferrous target. Buddy, I'll trust that all day long.
It was a strong, loud target.
Yeah.
It was a strong, loud target. It wasn't, when you have weak targets, the detector takes a fairly decently strong target in order to have a decent reading.
Right.
And so when you get little chirpy targets, which the gold that I was digging at this spot were all little flakes.
Mm-hmm.
I dug the other day when I was there, I dug 6 flakes, and the total was a little over a grain. Not a gram, a grain.
Grain. Yeah.
Okay, so 6 pieces totaling a little over a grain. Yeah, that's really tiny.
Yeah.
So anyway, but it was fun. I had a good time. I videoed most of it and had a good time with it. So
here's where the purist argument's going to come in. Okay, Chris, yeah, sure. You went ahead, Chris, Kevin, whoever else is out there using this new technology and just saying, you know what, no matter how I hit this, it is a solid iron target. There is no fluctuation in any way, shape, or the form of the target. And we walk on and we go to the next one. Now the purists that are left out there, they're going to say, but Chris, Kevin, all the other guys, how do you know that you didn't leave a gold nugget, a big gold nugget under that great big ferrous piece of iron?
If it were under there of any decent size, then it would interfere with the reading,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it wasn't perfectly under the iron target. If it was off a little bit to the side, which is way more likely.
Right.
You would pass over it and you'd start to get like a non-ferrous, then ferrous reading.
Mm-hmm.
The machine would be giving you a double bleep or something like that, a little bit. And if it's a confused reading at all, you've got to dig it. The confused reading is the reading of I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
And so you've got to dig all the I don't knows. If it's really, really certain, and and the other thing is, like you talked about new users. If you're a new user, yeah, you should dig it all. Wait until you've dug a whole bunch of those, and look at the discriminator when you're digging it. Even if you're going to dig it all, you dig it, and the detector's saying iron, 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 and you decide, okay, I'm digging it. And you dig it out, and it's an old piece of a tin can, and it's like, oh, you learn something from that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an educational experience, and you chalk it up to experience. And after you've dug a few hundred of those, then maybe your education will add up, and you'll say, okay, well, I know what a solid iron signal looks like, and I've got experience with my detector. That's true too. It's not just the new technology, but it's knowing your detector and having and spend enough time out in the field that you know how it reacts so that you can make those judgments.
And that was where I was leading this into, is that you can have the greatest technology in the world, but if you don't know really what your detector is telling you, if you're not really good friends with your detector at this point in time, you really don't know everything that it's telling you. And you need to start learning that. You really need to know your machine inside and outside, forwards and backwards, the whole 9 yards. And one of the things I stressed yesterday while I was with these guys is that, if I get up here, and I'm just going to use this as an example, it's a brand new area. Let's say I've never hunted it. I'm going to dig every target that I hit, even with the discriminator going off. When I dig 4 or 5 8-penny nails, I see where they're hitting on the discriminator. I hear what the signal sounds like. I know that if there's no fluctuation or anything else, I'm not going to dig any more of those. But I'm going to dig a few of them just to make sure. Now, the one thing I want to ask you, Chris, because this is something I've noticed in some of the areas that I hunt, but I also go from one extreme of ground mineralization to the next. Have you noticed that your discrimination settings will change, or I'm sorry, your discrimination series or signal will change based upon the ground mineralization that you're in?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about that. That the if you get a heavily iron mineralized, it does affect the signal that you get from the machine.
Right. So the big lesson there is for people that are using discrimination. You cannot just say that, okay, I work here and this is where I always work, but when I go over there, if I hear the same exact signals, I can just depend on that to always be correct. I have a hard time with that one. That's the one that I just won't buy into completely, because I've had some signals, and not necessarily on this new technology, the Gold Monster, where if that thing nails Ferrous and it doesn't fluctuate at all, there is no, I don't know. It is just this. But I've gone into other areas because of ground mineralization. It was a iron signal, but when I dug it down, it wasn't necessarily all iron. You've got to know your surroundings. You've got to know where you're working along with what you're working with. I don't know if you agree with that one completely.
No, I agree with it. Not only that, but I would add that it's not just iron. It can be salt,
Yes.
too.
Yes.
I hit a spot that some friends bulldozed in an old hydraulic pit. Okay, they had permission and everything. It was totally legal.
Right.
And around the center part of where they bulldozed, they got some really great nuggets. I was there, and we were just digging nugget after nugget after nugget after nugget, because once you have, it was an old hydraulic pit. It's a tertiary pit, and once you scrape off the trash that's on the surface and get down through the gravel to the bedrock, there's nothing there that's metal other than gold. And so we did that, but there was some really salty ground around the periphery of that little spot. And boy, you'd go there and the detector would just moan and groan, and I couldn't use any of the discrimination. I just had to use my ear to try and discriminate just with my ear from the moaning and groaning of the detector to the signal sound through that of a target. And I did pick out a couple little nuggets, but it was hard because the salt was difficult on the detector.
Did you ever have the opportunity to work any of the salt areas in Australia when you were there?
No, we never got into any significant salt. And I had the detector I was using at the time was the 5000,
Mm-hmm.
and it does pretty good on salt, but we never got into any of the salt lakes or around the edges of the salt lakes, that kind of stuff. No, I didn't see any significant salt. I've seen way more salt in Nevada. In places, there's places where the ground in Nevada is pretty salty,
That is
especially
true.
up there by in the north of the rye patch area. There's salty areas.
Right. Right. Yeah, I taken on a couple of day trip, and we got into one of the really alkaline or one of the really salty, and it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. I've never been so beat up in my life, and how those guys could sit there and work through that on a day-to-day basis. Just more power to them. I couldn't do it. I flat couldn't do it. It just made me crazy. Okay, so
Yeah.
what are our takeaways here? Well, anything else you want to add on this?
I think we're ready for takeaways.
Okay.
I would say one is, in order to use the discrimination, you have to understand your detector.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not experienced with your detector and recognize the sounds that it makes, you should not be using that discrimination yet. Two, you have to be experienced enough to be able to accurately pinpoint the target. Because if you can't pinpoint it and you're swinging just near it, or not quite to it, or something like that, your discrimination will give you weird readings that are unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have the skill to be able to pinpoint. And then third, to have the discretion to mostly dig at all unless you really, really need to use the discriminator.
Mm-hmm. And I think that absolutely goes along with my please don't ever become dependent upon your discriminator.
Right.
Know when to use it, when not to use it. And I think for me is that takeaway, don't become dependent upon it. And the last one is for me is remember that every area is different. And so when you step into a new area, make sure that you know what you're hearing. And that kind of falls back across all of your takeaways that you said. And I think that's it.
Sounds great.
Okay. So dig it all or use your discriminator sparingly. So there you go, folks. Until the next time, enjoy yourself, have fun, and go prospecting.